Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is David Abramowitz, Chief Technologist at Trend Micro Federal. David, good to have you with us.
Good to be here, Tom. Thank you for having me.
And let's talk about the person of the day these days, the Chief Information Security Officer and their staffs. What do you think are their top concerns these days, right here in early 2023, and how's that been evolving and changing?
I think if you look back, the issues they were more concerned with were technology-based solutions. So it's, I have this technology problem, and we would come in as a vendor and say, here's the technology solution. That's evolved into more of a risk discussion. So they're concerned very much with what is the risk of my organization? Where am I vulnerable? Where do I have misconfigurations? Things like that. So the risk has a bunch of components. That's the first one, is being able to assess. Can you help me assess my environment? Tell me where all my devices are. Tell me if I have rogue IT running around the environment. Where are my vulnerabilities that aren't patched? Because patch cycles are very challenging. Where do I have misconfigurations that, if not treated, might land me in the newspaper, for instance? So that's the first part. The second part that they're concerned about in that risk picture is, help me correlate all of these disparate pieces of information. So I have things going on my endpoints. I have things going on in the cloud, on my network, in email. And all of those need to be correlated in a way that I can understand them and bring them all together and get a real picture of what's going on and where do I need to focus my efforts to remediate that activity. Because that's going to help me create policy and put my focus and my resources in the right places.
Yeah, so it kind of gives you a directional concept by having a risk management and a priority list, then you know what to do first.
Exactly, and the last part of that is that threats have evolved also. It used to be, of course, you had a signature that we could match against, but now it's all about behaviors. And so if you can tell me how those behaviors map to tactics and techniques, that's going to really help me know what to look out for.
All right, and so the other issue you hear CISOs talk about, and people in cybersecurity, and really the CIO staffs, and that is the number of tools they're dealing with, what's out there to help them, and there's no shortage of vendors, frankly, and selling different tools. So that's the second order of issue they have, and that is, how do I make sense of all of my possible fixes and tools?
Exactly, because back a little earlier, the approach was, I'll bring in best of breed solutions. And that's fine, and that worked, but now you've got best of breed solutions from a slew of vendors in your environment. The CISO is running around to 17, 20 different people who are looking at 16, 17 different consoles, trying to make sense of everything. And so that brings about the need for a security abstraction layer, which will bring all of those disparate pieces together and create a picture for what's going on in the environment. So you can have all kinds of different pieces from all different vendors, but if I can't correlate all that information together, I really don't have a picture of what's going on and how to handle it. And so CISOs are looking for vendors who can come in with that approach, and whether or not I'm running your particular security endpoint on my desktops, for instance, I still want you to be able to correlate that information, collect it up, and show it to me in a way that I can understand and take action. And that's the kind of vendor that a CISO will want to build a strategic relationship with.
And getting back to the question of risk management that we talked about a few moments ago, that security abstraction layer, should that be configurable to kind of contour itself to the risk management framework, such that the abstraction output relates to what it is you most worry about?
That's right. You bring all those pieces together. So here's what we're seeing on the network. Here's what we're seeing on email. Here's what we're seeing in the endpoints. Bringing all that together. Oh, that happens to be indicative of a particular attack by a particular threat actor. And here are the other behaviors that you should now expect to look for. And here are the tools they use that you should be able to search for using that security abstraction layer in your environment to see how deep are they in here and what do I need to do.
A lot of CISOs, they're concerned with their own patch management cycles, and we have continuous monitoring and patching and so forth, but they're also starting to look at vendors' patch cycles and even going to a vendor and say, you got to do this more often, you got to be faster at your own patching. So could that abstraction layer help give them that information to go to the vendor and say, my dashboard says you got to pick this up?
Yeah, there's a few pieces to that. The first is that those vulnerabilities that are exposed are the ones that have not been patched yet. And that comes from maybe a vendor's own technology, that comes from feeding in other utilities that specialize in that vulnerability assessment. But that's the first piece of information. Where are the vulnerabilities that are not patched? And now, what do you do to remediate that? What patches do you need to address those problems so that they don't become bigger issues? Because, like you said, patch management cycles are long and arduous, and there's a lot of period of time in there where a threat actor can take advantage and exploit an unpatched vulnerability. So it's really our job as vendors to filter out those communications and those activities that are trying to take advantage of vulnerabilities so that a customer has time to patch. And like you said, they're looking at us also to be quicker to that, and threat intelligence is a big part of that.
Yeah, and that question of threat intelligence, what exactly is that, and how does that bake into the solutions that CISOs need?
So if you think of a security solution as the car, threat intelligence is the engine. So threat intelligence informs all of the behaviors that we're looking for. It tells us what a particular threat actor's tactics and techniques are. It tells us where else have we seen this kind of attack, what industries does it target, what particular agencies does it target, for instance. And so all of that threat intelligence is a huge part of how a CISO will look at the environment, because the threat intelligence, if you look at, let's say, a CISO will look at a vendor that has reported the largest number of vulnerabilities, right? And take a look at that vendor and say, okay, who is this that's leading the pack, reporting those vulnerabilities? Because that information is going to inform the protection that gets put in place.
Right, so then threat intelligence too then almost has to map to the risk management framework also, because you want to know what threats are most potent according to what you have determined are your organization's greatest risks.
Exactly. You go from an isolated incident at an endpoint, which gets addressed, and maybe that's the end of the story. But if you have the sensors around that are picking up the activity everywhere, and the threat intelligence mixed into that, then the threat intelligence says, okay, we are seeing this from the endpoint, and maybe alone it's not a big deal, but we're also seeing this at the network layer, and this stuff's coming in via email, and so on and so forth, so that collectively this is actually part of a campaign, and here's the threat actor, and here's all the information you need to know. That's where threat intelligence is really key.
Right, so it's part of that whole integration framework under that layer that we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
And the cloud, we can't have a security discussion without mentioning cloud, which is kind of a new person, new entity at the table for everybody. And cloud brings its own vulnerabilities, so how does that affect what is classically the way people would look at cyber?
There's a couple of things there. Number one, the cloud becomes part of that attack surface management, because I have to know not only about what's on premise and what my exposures are there, but what about all the stuff I have in the cloud? What are my exposures there? Maybe I've got a misconfigured bucket of information, and if I don't patch that up, then I'm going to have a problem because I'm in the cloud. Now, in terms of federal agencies, not all federal agencies will make that jump or are making that jump to the cloud. So we have to be also very sensitive to customers that need to remain on-premise. And we're going to see a lot of technologies come out that actually bring all of the advantages of the cloud on-premise, because they just have to have it for whatever reason, compliance, maybe it's an air-gapped environment. So bringing all of that intelligence and capability on-premise is important. So we don't want to be in a position where we're going to abandon customers who need to stay on-premise for whatever the reason.
Right, because that air-gap need and also the rise of edge computing, it's never that agencies will pull all the plugs on everything they own and operate.
Right.
You can see that. And I guess we should end with the user. You know, in Detroit, they used to say we can fix any part of the car, make it safer, except the nut behind the wheel. And CISOs complain about users all the time. How can we get around that ongoing problem?
Yeah, that's going to be around for quite some time. There is always going to be a reason. A lot of our customers, for instance, are very short-staffed. They don't have the resources to address everything. So their analysts have 5, 10, 20, 30 different things going on at one time. They see something come up in email and it's, oh, they're going to click, right? Because they're just distracted by the other things. So that's just part of human behavior. It's naturally going to happen. We have to assume that's going to happen, just as we assume a threat actor is going to continue to play this game of cat and mouse with security vendors. As soon as we shut one door, they're going to find a way to open another one. So we have to assume the end user is going to click on those emails that are phishing emails that wind up starting this cycle of a threat coming in. Therefore, what we need to focus on is what is happening in the environment when that click happens, and let's shut it down as soon as possible so that it doesn't become something bigger.
You've given us a lot to think about today. Great having you in.
I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks for the opportunity.
Our guest today has been David Abramowitz, Chief Technologist at Trend Micro Federal. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.